Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
If you're a parent who is worried that because of the lockdown or because of the pandemic or because you've lost a job or because of just life, if you're concerned for your own child's safety, jump on the phone to Parent Line.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
G'day, this is Dr. Justin Coulson, the author of a bunch of books about happy families, here with Kylie, my wife, mum to our 6 daughters. And Kylie, normally we talk about happy families. Today, not so much happiness. Bit of a tough topic today.
Well, we're coming from the doctor's desk and we've actually called in another expert today. You are not kingpin today.
I'm okay with that because the information that we're going to share with you is just so important. So over the last couple of doctor's desk episodes that we've done, we do it about once a month, sometimes twice. As data comes across the desk, I look at that data, I look at those reports, I have a look at the media releases, whatever it might be, and report on what new science is telling us. And we've emphasised the impact that COVID and specifically lockdowns are having on the mental health or the ill mental health, the ill health of our children and young people. A trigger warning before we start. The conversation today is not rated explicit, but we do advise listener discretion. We will be discussing themes of suicide and abuse because unfortunately there have been some new studies published or some new research printed that helps us to get a good idea of what's actually going on here. Now, what we were going to talk about was some studies that showed that eating disorders were rising significantly in Australia because of COVID. That's what I intended to talk about. But a media release came across my desk from Kids Helpline, and it grabbed my attention, and I just knew this was the conversation we have to have today. So the eating disorder stuff, we're going to push back for another week or two. Tony Fitzgerald is the Virtual Services Manager at Your Town and Kids Helpline, and Tony joins us today. Tony, welcome to the Happy Families podcast. Thanks for giving us your time.
Thanks so much, Justin. Great to be with you.
Tony, some statistics that Kids Helpline has compiled tell a fairly confronting and very challenging story when it comes to Australia and young people and their ill health mentally. Can you tell us what you discovered and why you were looking at it in the first place?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Over the last 6 months, COVID's been going on for over 12 months now, and we've generally seen the impact on the mental health and wellbeing for young people because they contact us and they tell us what's going on. But over the last 6 months, our counsellors were telling us that they were seeing an increase in their need to support young people in crisis, particularly around suicide and child abuse. And we have a threshold where we have to enact what we call duty of care and get support to young people straight away because they're at immediate risk of harm. So our counsellors were telling us that they were really, seeing on a daily basis a fairly significant increase in the need for them to support young people around these specific issues. So that caused us to have a look at the data and see what it was telling us. And the release we put out showed that over the last 6 months, so from the 1st of December last year through to the end of May this year, nationally, we saw a 99% increase in those duty of care interventions, those interventions where we've had to get immediate support or report to child safety an issue with a young person around child abuse and or around suicide risk specifically.
So what you're saying, when you say you have to call for an immediate intervention, you're essentially saying you've got to send an ambulance to their house or you've got to send the police to their house or somebody to immediately help them because there's a crisis unfolding.
Correct, because our counsellors have done that assessment and that assessment tells us that young person is at imminent risk of harm to themselves. So that was quite concerning. And then, having a look at some of the state data, we saw that there were this increase was generally uniform across the board. But then when we drilled down to Victoria specifically, the increase was across the board for duty of care was 184% compared to the same period last year. And if you recall, that last year also included the first 2 or 3 months of COVID. And then when we drilled down, it showed a 44% increase in our need to support a young person who was at immediate risk of suicide, and a 31% increase to support a young person who was at immediate risk of harm as a result of abuse that was occurring predominantly in the home. And that was Victoria only. The stats for some of the other states are variable. In other states, child abuse is actually higher than suicide, but Victoria stood out because of that overall global 184% increase.
Those numbers are staggering, Tony. When we looked at that release and noticed that, the age group where it seems to be most vulnerable is those 13 to 18-year-olds. When you look at the data, are these children known to you? Are they, or are these just new cases that are coming out? We're talking about COVID here, and the acknowledgement that COVID is having an impact on society and specifically on our young people and their mental health and their safety. But is COVID to blame? Is that the real problem, or is there more to it?
Look, I think it's clear, the data is clear that, and particularly given the increase in Victoria alone, we know that Victoria has been impacted probably more than any other state in the country over the last 12 months. That COVID and the pandemic must be playing some kind of a role here. What we're seeing in the young people that we're supporting is that many of them might be those who've contacted us over a period of time and have an existing established relationship with one of our counsellors, and their mental health has escalated over a period of time, and that they then come to us with that need for immediate crisis support. Other instances might be, for instance, young people who've contacted us for the first time, but nevertheless do have some kind of history, some long-standing history or ongoing history of mental health, and COVID has just exacerbated what's going on for them. Whether that's lockdowns, whether that's isolation from their friends and their peers, the additional pressures on families as a result of, loss of jobs, the whole gamut of impacts that COVID has had and we've seen across the board is really impacting our young people.
We're talking to Tony Fitzgerald. He's the Virtual Services Manager at Kids Helpline and Your Town. In just a second, we're going to find out what we can do if we're concerned about our children's well-being, and what we can also do to protect them from the ongoing impact of COVID within our families.
It's the Happy Families Podcast.
Are screens creating tension at home? Tweens, Teens and Screens is a webinar to guide families to healthy, safe super screen solutions. Buy it today at happyfamilies.com.au/shop.
It's the Happy Families Podcast, the podcast for the time poor parent who just wants answers now. And today we're having a rather difficult conversation.
Yeah, we're talking about the increased incidence of suicide attempts, suicidality and child abuse that seems to be very clearly linked with not just COVID, but I think, and I'm going to distance Kids Helpline and Tony from this. I'm just going to put it out there as a Dr. Justin Coulson hypothesis. The exacerbated risk to our children's mental health as a result of ongoing lockdowns, because Victoria is absolutely getting pounded. And data from around the world seems to be showing the same thing. The more that there are lockdowns, the greater the impact on mental health. It's almost like the health officers, the epidemiologists, and I'm very, very clear here, I'm not an epidemiologist, nor am I saying that I know better. I'm not making that point at all. What I am suggesting is that when we make avoidance of COVID outbreaks our sole determinant of whether or not we're being successful at the moment in the global pandemic, we miss a lot of other things that are going to contribute to other factors that can lead to increased mental illness, increased risk of suicide, increased risk of abuse, and all of the other challenges that go along with a family who can no longer provide because they've lost their business, or relationships that are shattering because people just can't actually live together. They don't like each other that much. Unfortunately, they don't have happy families, and all that kind of stuff. So the data seems to be pointing really clearly that Victoria's fourth lockdown has been unhelpful and maybe even genuinely detrimental, at least for some. The other point that Tony made before we go back to Tony is the idea that the word that I use is the pandemic, and especially the lockdowns, have been an accelerant. So you asked whether or not the kids that were at risk were already at risk, or whether COVID has created it. And Tony suggested that most of these kids have already had underlying pre-existing mental health issues that already required attention, and now they're calling Kids Helpline because the lockdowns and the pandemic and the isolation, et cetera, seems to have exacerbated, accelerated what's going on.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of the breakdown from where I'm looking at it. And I know that there's a bit of hypothetical conjecture going in there from me. And I want to distance Kids Helpline from it. They're not saying that, and it's not something that we're going to ask them about. But Tony, Kylie and I were talking about this before we got to chat with you. If I'm a parent and I'm not coping because my partner or I have lost our jobs and we can't make ends meet and there's friction in the home and we've got a child who's got underlying mental health issues, or maybe we've got them ourselves, or there's drug and alcohol abuse, whatever the case may be, if I'm concerned about my child's well-being, how do I know? I mean, I've done podcasts on this before, but you're at the coalface. You're actually getting the phone calls. If I'm worried, how do I know that I should be worried? What do you look for when you get these calls to Kids Helpline?
Look, I think it's going to be something you have to take on a case-by-case basis, and parents know their kids the best, right? You know, I think one of the things you've highlighted is if you're not looking after yourself as a parent and your mental health is not great, you're not going to be in a good position to figure out what's going on for your children as well. So number one is look after yourself. That's one of the key messages that we would certainly put out there. But in terms of your children, you know, I think it's really, as a parent, being attuned to those changes in behaviour that don't really seem to be in place, that are a bit odd, and that's compounded at the moment and has been for the last 12 months, because normally, you know, if your child's going to school and they're interacting with their friends and all of a sudden that stops, that's a bit of a red flag in terms of something going on. But if they're not at school and they're not interacting, you don't have that cue, do you? You can't necessarily see that. So it's really, I think, being attuned and looking out for those significant shifts in behaviour at the home and what you're observing that look a little out of place and doesn't seem right, whether sleeping patterns are being interrupted, whether eating patterns are being interrupted, whether your child or young one stops doing things that normally they would really, really enjoy. It's keeping a lookout for those things. But I think the most important thing then is, if you're concerned about it, is just creating some space to listen and a really a good environment for your kids to have a conversation with you about what's going on. When kids contact us, overwhelmingly they just want someone to listen to them, and they tell us that at times they don't want to bother mum and dad with what's going on because they don't feel like they're being listened to, or they're worried because mum and dad are going through stuff as well, and they don't want to place that extra burden on them. So I think it's really about creating an environment for discussion and, you know, for your kids to raise those kind of issues, and for you then as a parent not to just jump to judgment or jump to a solution immediately, as difficult as that might be for a parent when you finally all of a sudden discover that your child is going through some significant mental health concerns. It can be really, really confronting, and parents may not know what to do. But I think that first step is to react calmly and to be supportive and loving and non-judgmental as you possibly can. And if you're not coping and you're struggling to know what to do, it's always a great thing as a parent to encourage your child. Make it clear to them, if you don't want to have a chat to me, and I understand that, then, you know, there's services like Kids Helpline where you can get on the phone and speak to a counsellor, and that's perfectly fine. If you feel more comfortable talking in a confidential environment about what's going on, then we really should be encouraging that with our kids at an early age, you know, normalising that help-seeking behaviour and helping them understand that it's perfectly normal to talk to someone about what's going on.
Your town, which is behind Kids Helpline, is also behind Parentline.
Correct.
And Parentline has been advertising on the Happy Families podcast for the last little while so that we can get the message out that parents need to have important conversations, and sometimes a counsellor is the person to do that. I'm actually going to explicitly say that if you're a parent who is worried that because of the lockdown or because of the pandemic or because you've lost a job or because of just life, if you're concerned for your own child's safety, jump on the phone to Parent Line. They're not there to get you in trouble. They're there to support you and help you. Is it okay if I give that little plug to your
it's
other
more than
sister,
okay. You know,
sister phone
and
line?
Parent Line's there for exactly the same reason.
Yeah.
As kids for parents, as Kids Helpline is there for kids. You know, it doesn't matter what the issue is. If you as a parent are concerned about your children or others' children, and you need to contact us, you can, and you can have that conversation with us. And you know, there's a Parent Line in every state. We run the Parent Line that services Queensland and Northern Territory. But if you jump on our Parent Line website, you can see the other parent lines that you'll be able to contact as well. But you know, it's not that uncommon for parents to contact Kids Helpline as well. And if a parent does, we'll always have a conversation with them and try and point them in the right direction. So
Great
so
stuff.
either or, but certainly Parent Line is there as a great resource for parents.
And in the interest of full disclosure, I wasn't actually aware that you had that relationship between those two lines when we began the conversation, and there is no conflict of interest or anything funny going on here. This isn't some sort of an advertorial. This is purely because this is an issue. I saw the media release and really wanted to talk about it. Tony Fitzgerald, you've been a wonderful support, a wealth of information, and a delightful person to talk to about such a serious issue. Tony Fitzgerald's the Virtual Services Manager at Your Town and Kids Helpline. Thanks so much for spending some time with Kylie and I today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and best wishes to everyone.
We really hope that this has been a helpful conversation for you. If you do need help again, contact Kids Helpline or Parent Line, and they will do all that they can to provide the service, the assistance, the counselling that you need to help your family to be stronger and happier. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. And if you'd like more info about making your family happier, you can get our support as well, all at happyfamilies.com.au.